I woke up at 2 in the morning and something was standing next to my bed. Not a person. Not a shadow from the streetlight. Something else. A tall, dark figure with no face just standing there in the darkness watching me sleep. I was fully awake. I could move. I could think. And when I finally turned on the light, it vanished into thin air like it had never existed. What I saw that night in my Portland apartment changed everything I thought I knew about reality. And I still can't explain it. Welcome to Morvic Stories. This is my experience with the shadow person that stood beside my bed. I never believed in ghosts. I never believed in anything paranormal, really. I was the kind of person who would laugh at horror movies and roll my eyes when friends would share their spooky stories around a campfire. I needed logic. I needed explanations. I needed things to make sense. But what happened to me 3 years ago in my apartment in Portland, Oregon completely shattered everything I thought I knew about reality. And I still can't explain it. I still can't rationalize it. And honestly, I'm not even sure I want to anymore. It was late October 2021. I remember because the trees outside were already bare and the rain had started coming down in those heavy constant sheets that Portland is known for. I had just moved into this apartment about 2 months earlier. It was a small one-bedroom place in an old building from the 1940s in the Hawthorne district. The kind of place with hardwood floors that creaked no matter how carefully you walked and radiators that clanked and hissed throughout the night. But it had character and it was affordable and it was mine. My first place living completely alone after years of roommates and shared spaces. The building itself had this weird energy from day one. I'm not saying it felt haunted or anything like that. It just felt old. Heavy. Like the walls had absorbed decades of life and stories and emotions. The hallways were always dim even during the day because the landlord refused to put in brighter bulbs. He said it saved money. My apartment was on the 3rd floor at the end of the hall, and my bedroom window looked out over the street where you could hear cars passing by at all hours and the occasional homeless person shouting into the night. I worked from home as a graphic designer, so I spent a lot of time in that apartment. Maybe too much time. I'd gotten into this routine where I'd work late into the evening because I had clients on the East Coast, and their schedules didn't always match up with mine. So it wasn't unusual for me to still be at my desk at midnight or 1 in the morning finishing up projects and sipping cold coffee. The first weird thing happened about 3 weeks before the incident I'm about to tell you about. I was in bed trying to fall asleep, and I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. They'd walk from one end of the hall to the other and then stop. Then they'd start again. Back and forth. Back and forth. At first I thought it was just a neighbor. Maybe someone pacing while on a phone call or dealing with insomnia. But it happened every single night at almost exactly the same time. 2:15 in the morning. I checked my phone enough times to notice the pattern. One night I actually got up and looked through the peephole in my door. The hallway was empty. Completely empty. But I could still hear the footsteps. Clear as day. Walking right past my door. I convinced myself it was just the old building settling. Pipes expanding and contracting. Wood shifting. Whatever explanation my logical brain could come up with to make sense of it. Then about a week later I started waking up at random times during the night with this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. You know that sensation, right? When you can just feel eyes on you even when you can't see anyone. It's primal. It's instinctive. And it was happening to me almost every night. I'd wake up suddenly heart racing and I'd scan the room, but there was never anything there. Just shadows and the faint orange glow from the streetlight outside filtering through my curtains. I started sleeping with my bedroom door closed even though I'd always preferred it open. I started keeping a lamp on in the living room so there'd be some light coming under the door. I told myself I was just being paranoid. That living alone was making me jumpy. That my imagination was running wild because I'd been watching too many true crime documentaries before bed. But deep down I knew something felt wrong. The night it happened was a Thursday. I remember because I'd had a video call earlier that day with a client who'd been particularly difficult and I treated myself to Thai food for dinner as a way to decompress. I'd watched a couple episodes of some sitcom I can't even remember now and I'd gone to bed around 11:30. Earlier than usual. I was exhausted. The kind of exhausted where your whole body just aches and you know you're going to sleep hard. And I did sleep hard. For a few hours at least. Then I woke up. It was that sudden jarring kind of waking up where you go from deep sleep to complete consciousness in an instant. My eyes snapped open and my whole body went rigid. The room was dark except for that same orange glow from outside, and I could hear the rain pelting against the window. But something was different. Something was wrong. That feeling of being watched was back, but this time it was so intense it was almost physical. Like a weight pressing down on my chest. I couldn't move at first. I don't know if it was fear or something else, but I was completely frozen lying there on my right side facing the wall. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And then I realized what was different. I could feel someone behind me, not just the sensation of being watched. I could actually feel a presence standing right next to my bed. On the left side, where nobody should be because I lived alone and my door was closed and locked. The air felt thick and cold. Colder than it should have been even with the drafty windows. And there was this smell. Faint but distinct. Like old paper and dust and something else I couldn't quite place. Something stale and wrong. I wanted to turn around. Every part of my rational brain was screaming at me to just look and see that nothing was there. That it was all in my head. But I couldn't. I physically could not make myself turn over. It was like my body knew something my mind was trying to deny. Like some ancient survival instinct had kicked in and was telling me to stay absolutely still. So I lay there frozen in terror for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. The presence didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting. I could feel its attention on me like a physical thing. And then very slowly I forced myself to turn my head. Just slightly, just enough to see over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. Standing right next to my bed, no more than 2 feet away from me, was a shadow. But not a normal shadow. This was a figure. A human-shaped darkness that was somehow darker than the surrounding room. It was tall, maybe 6 feet or more, and it had a defined shape. Shoulders, a head, what might have been arms hanging at its sides. But no features, no face, just this void in the shape of a person standing absolutely motionless beside my bed. I stopped breathing. I'm not exaggerating. I literally stopped breathing. My entire body locked up and all I could do was stare at this thing. This impossible thing that shouldn't exist. Time seemed to stretch out. Every second felt like an eternity. And the whole time this shadow figure just stood there. Not moving. Not making a sound. Just existing in a way that violated everything I understood about reality. Then it moved. Not in a walking way but in this slow, deliberate way where it seemed to lean forward. Toward me. Like it was bending down to get a closer look. And I swear I felt cold air brush against my face. Like breath but not breath. Something empty and hollow and ancient. That's when I finally managed to move. I jerked backward so hard I almost fell off the other side of the bed. I scrambled for the lamp on my nightstand and knocked over a glass of water in the process. The sound of it shattering on the floor was deafening in the silence. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the lamp switch, but I finally got it on. The room flooded with light, and the shadow was gone. Just completely gone. Like it had never been there at all. I sat there in bed breathing hard, looking around frantically, but there was nothing. No figure. No darkness. No presence. Just my normal bedroom with broken glass on the floor and water spreading across the hardwood. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Couldn't. I sat up in bed with every light in the apartment turned on until the sun came up. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep paralysis maybe. A waking dream. Carbon monoxide poisoning. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd felt. And more importantly, I knew I hadn't been paralyzed. I'd moved. I turned over. I'd scrambled away and turned on the light. This wasn't sleep paralysis. The next few days were rough. I was exhausted from lack of sleep, but too terrified to close my eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. I considered breaking my lease and moving out, but I couldn't afford to. I just signed for a full year and I didn't have money for a deposit on a new place. So I did what any reasonable person would do in my situation. I started researching. I spent hours reading about shadow people. That's apparently what they're called. Shadow people or shadow figures. And there are thousands of accounts from people all over the world who've seen them. People who describe the exact same thing I saw. A dark human-shaped figure with no features that appears and disappears suddenly. Some people say they're ghosts. Others say they're interdimensional beings. Some think they're sleep paralysis hallucinations, even though plenty of people like me see them while fully awake and mobile. I found forums and Reddit threads and YouTube videos. Story after story of people who'd experienced the exact same thing. Some saw them multiple times. Some said the shadow people followed them. Others said they only saw them once. There was no consensus on what they were or what they wanted. But the one thing everyone agreed on was that seeing one was terrifying on a level that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. I also learned that old buildings seem to have more reports of shadow people than newer ones. And buildings with a lot of history, especially if people had died there. So I started digging into the history of my apartment building. Turns out a woman had died in the building back in 1987. Not in my specific unit, but in the building. Natural causes from what I could find. Heart attack. She'd lived alone on the second floor and wasn't found for almost a week. I don't know if that's connected. I don't know if it matters. But it made me feel slightly less insane to know that other people in other places had seen what I'd seen. That I wasn't losing my mind. I stayed in that apartment for 9 more months. Until my lease was up. And I never saw the shadow figure again. Not once. The footsteps in the hallway continued for a few more weeks and then stopped. The feeling of being watched faded gradually. Life went back to something resembling normal. But I was different. I couldn't look at the world the same way anymore. Because here's the thing. I still can't explain what I saw that night. I can't rationalize it or logic it away. I tried. Believe me, I tried. But at the end of the day, I know what I experienced. I know I was awake. I know I wasn't dreaming. And I know that for those few terrifying minutes, something impossible was standing right next to my bed watching me sleep. I moved to a newer apartment building after my lease ended. A place from the 2000s with bright hallways and thin walls and no history. I sleep better now. But sometimes late at night, when the room is dark and quiet, I still get that feeling. That primal instinct that tells me I'm not alone. And I wonder if it followed me. If whatever that shadow was is still out there somewhere. Still watching. I still don't know if I believe in ghosts. I don't know what I believe in anymore, honestly. But I know what I saw. And I know I'll never forget the way my blood ran cold when I turned over and saw that impossible figure standing in the darkness. Tall and still and utterly silent. Just watching me with eyes it didn't have. If you've ever experienced something like this, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Because I spent a long time thinking I was crazy. Thinking I was the only one. But I'm not. There are thousands of us. Thousands of people who've seen things we can't explain. And maybe by sharing our stories we can make sense of it. Or at least feel a little less alone in the darkness. Thanks for listening. And maybe tonight before you turn off the lights, take one more look around your room. Just to make sure you're really alone. Because sometimes the things we can't see are the ones standing right next to us. Story number 2, I need to tell you about something that happened to me 3 years ago. Something I've tried to rationalize and explain away 1,000 times. But no matter how hard I try to convince myself there was a logical explanation, I know deep down what I heard that night was not human. And I think it was trying to lure me out of my room. This happened in the fall of 2021. I was 24 years old and living alone for the first time in my life. I had just moved into this old apartment building in Portland, Oregon. The place was built sometime in the 1940s and it had that vintage charm that I thought was so cool when I first saw it. High ceilings, original hardwood floors, those old radiator heaters that clank and hiss. Big windows with the kind of glass that's slightly warped from age. The rent was cheap, way cheaper than anything else I'd looked at in the area. The landlord was this older guy named Mr. Chun who seemed nice enough. A little quiet, a little odd. When I asked him why the rent was so low, he just shrugged and said the building was old and needed work. Said most young people today wanted modern apartments with stainless steel appliances and granite countertops. He seemed almost relieved that I appreciated the character of the place. I should have known something was off when he asked me if I was a light sleeper. I laughed it off and said no. Said I could sleep through anything. He nodded slowly and said that was good. Real good. Then he handed me the keys and told me to call him if I needed anything, but also said he preferred tenants who could handle things on their own. I thought he was just saying he didn't want to be bothered with every little maintenance request. Now I think he meant something else entirely. The apartment was a one-bedroom on the third floor. Corner unit. My bedroom window faced the street and I could see this old oak tree that was probably as old as the building itself. The living room was small but cozy. The kitchen was cramped and outdated but functional. The bathroom had this old clawfoot tub that I actually loved. Everything about the place felt like stepping back in time. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. Better than fine, actually. I was working from home as a graphic designer and I loved having my own space. No roommates to worry about. No one eating my food or leaving dishes in the sink. Just me and the quiet sounds of an old building settling. That's the thing about old buildings, though. They're never really quiet. There's always some sound. The pipes groaning. The floors creaking. The radiators clicking on and off. After a while you get used to it. Those sounds become like white noise. Comforting even. They make you feel less alone. It was mid-October when things started to feel different. The weather had turned cold fast that year. One day it was still sunny and mild, and the next day the temperature dropped 20 degrees and it started raining. That thick, heavy Oregon rain that feels like it might never stop. The kind that makes everything feel dark and damp even in the middle of the day. I remember the first night I heard something strange. It was a Tuesday. I know because I had stayed up late working on a project that was due Wednesday morning. It was around 2 in the morning and I was finally shutting down my laptop when I heard it. A sound coming from somewhere in the apartment. At first I thought it was just the building settling or maybe a neighbor. But this was different. It sounded almost like humming. Low and rhythmic. So faint I wasn't even sure I was really hearing it. I sat there in my bed with my laptop on my legs and held my breath to listen. The humming continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. I waited for it to come back, but there was nothing. Just the usual sounds of the building. I convinced myself I'd imagined it or that it had come from outside or from another apartment. I was tired. My ears were probably playing tricks on me. But the next night I heard it again. This time I was already in bed trying to fall asleep. It was around midnight. I had turned off all the lights and was lying there in the dark waiting for sleep to come. That's when I heard the humming again. Same low rhythmic sound. It seemed to be coming from somewhere inside the apartment. Maybe the living room or the hallway. I sat up in bed and listened hard. My heart was starting to beat faster. The humming went on for about a minute this time. Then it stopped just as suddenly as it started. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Got out of bed and walked slowly toward my bedroom door. The apartment was dark and silent. I shined the light down the short hallway toward the living room. Nothing. I checked the front door. Locked. Checked the windows. Closed and locked. I even checked the closets and the bathroom. There was nothing there. No one there. I went back to bed, but I barely slept that night. Every little sound made me jump. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. I kept telling myself it was just the building. Old buildings make weird noises. That's normal. That's expected. The humming became a regular thing after that. Almost every night around the same time. Sometimes at midnight. Sometimes at 2 in the morning. Sometimes at 3. It was always the same low rhythmic sound. Sometimes it lasted 30 seconds. Sometimes a full minute. And it always seemed to come from inside the apartment. I tried to figure out where exactly it was coming from, but that was the weird thing. The source seemed to move. One night it sounded like it was in the living room. The next night, it sounded like it was in the hallway right outside my bedroom door. Another night, it sounded like it was coming from the bathroom. I started sleeping with my bedroom door closed and locked. I know that probably sounds paranoid, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong. Something was in my apartment at night. I could feel it. Around the beginning of November, things escalated. It was a Friday night and I had some friends over for drinks and a movie. We were having a good time, laughing and joking around. Everything felt normal. My friend Sarah asked me how I was liking the new place, and I almost told her about the humming but decided against it. I didn't want to sound crazy. Plus, I was starting to think maybe I'd been imagining it or blowing it out of proportion. My friends left around 11. I cleaned up a bit, then got ready for bed. I was tired and a little buzzed from the wine we'd been drinking. I remember thinking I'd probably sleep really well that night. Finally get some solid rest without being woken up by weird sounds. I was wrong. I woke up suddenly around 2:30 in the morning. That kind of wake up where you go from dead asleep to wide awake in an instant. Your body just knows something is wrong before your brain catches up. I lay there in the dark trying to figure out what had woken me. That's when I heard it. But this time it wasn't humming. It was breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing coming from inside my bedroom. From the corner near the window. My blood went cold. Every muscle in my body tensed up. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. Just lay there frozen in my bed with my eyes wide open staring into the darkness. The breathing continued. Deep inhale, slow exhale, deep inhale, slow exhale, over and over. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand. My hand was shaking so bad I almost knocked it onto the floor. I grabbed it and turned on the flashlight, pointed it toward the corner where the breathing was coming from. Nothing. The corner was empty, just my dresser and the window behind it. But the breathing didn't stop. It continued for another 30 seconds or so, then gradually faded away into silence. I kept the flashlight on and searched every inch of my bedroom. Under the bed, in the closet, behind the furniture. There was nothing there. No one there. But I had heard it. I know I heard it. That breathing was real. I didn't sleep at all the rest of that night. I sat up in bed with all the lights on and my phone in my hand ready to call 911. But what would I even say? That I heard breathing but there's no one here? They'd think I was crazy or drunk or both. When the sun came up, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Daylight made everything seem less threatening. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table trying to process what had happened. Trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it was the radiator. Maybe those old heaters can make sounds that resemble breathing. Maybe it was the wind outside creating some kind of acoustical effect through the old window panes. I almost convinced myself of that. Almost. But then things got worse. A few nights later, I was woken up again around 3 in the morning. This time by a different sound. Took me a second to place it, but then I realized what it was. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway right outside my bedroom door. The old floorboards creaking under weight. Someone or something was walking back and forth out there. I held my breath and listened. The footsteps went from one end of the hallway to the other. Stopped. Then came back. This pattern repeated maybe 4 or 5 times. Each time they passed my door, I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. Then they stopped right in front of my door. I stared at the door in the darkness, waiting for the handle to turn. Waiting for whatever was out there to try to come in. But nothing happened. Just silence. Heavy, oppressive silence that was somehow worse than the footsteps. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the footsteps again. This time moving away from my door. Down the hallway. Then they faded into nothing. I grabbed my phone and called my friend Marcus. I know it was the middle of the night, but I didn't care. I needed to hear another human voice. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. He answered on the fourth ring, sounding groggy and confused. I told him everything. The humming, the breathing, the footsteps. He listened without interrupting, and when I was done there was a long pause. Then he asked me if I'd been drinking or if I'd taken anything. I told him no. I was completely sober. He suggested maybe I was stressed or anxious and experiencing some kind of sleep disturbance. Maybe sleep paralysis or hypnagogic hallucinations. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I knew what I'd heard. This wasn't a dream or a hallucination. This was real. Marcus said I should stay at his place for a few days. Give myself a break from the apartment. Maybe the stress of living alone for the first time was getting to me. I thanked him and said I'd think about it. But I didn't go. Part of me felt like if I left I'd be admitting something was wrong. I'd be admitting I was scared. And I didn't want to do that. I regret that decision now. The next week was relatively quiet. I still heard the humming occasionally, but no more breathing or footsteps. I started to relax a little. Started to think maybe Marcus was right. Maybe I had been stressed and my mind had been playing tricks on me. Maybe old buildings really do just make weird sounds and I'd let my imagination run wild. Then came the night that changed everything. It was November 18th. I remember the date exactly because it was my mom's birthday and I'd spent the evening on the phone with my family. I was in a good mood, felt connected and grounded. I went to bed around 11 feeling better than I had in weeks. I woke up at exactly 3:33 in the morning. I know the time because I looked at my phone. I'm not sure what woke me, but I had this immediate sense that something was different. The air in the room felt heavier, colder, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. I lay there in the darkness listening. At first there was nothing, just the usual sounds. Then I heard it. A voice. Not humming. Not breathing. Not footsteps. A voice. It was coming from right outside my bedroom door. So close it sounded like whoever was speaking had their mouth pressed up against the wooden door. And what really made my skin crawl was that the voice sounded familiar. It sounded like my voice. Like someone was doing an impression of me. But it wasn't quite right. It was just slightly off. The tone was wrong. The cadence was wrong. It was like listening to a recording of yourself but played back at the wrong speed. The voice said my name, said it slowly, drawing out each syllable. Then it said it again, and again, over and over. My name repeated maybe 15 or 20 times. Each time with that same strange off quality that made it sound almost but not quite human. Then the voice said something else. Something that made every hair on my body stand on end. It said come out. Just those two words. Come out. Said in that weird wrong version of my own voice. Then silence. I didn't move. I could barely breathe. I just lay there staring at my bedroom door in the darkness. Every instinct I had was screaming at me that whatever was on the other side of that door was not human, was not natural, was something that should not exist. The voice spoke again. This time it sounded closer, like whatever it was had moved even nearer to the door. It said my name one more time, then said come out and play. Come out and play. Like this was a game. Like I was a child being called outside for recess. But the way it said those words made it clear this was not a game I wanted to play. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight. Pointed it at the door like the light could somehow protect me. The voice went silent. I sat there for what must have been 5 full minutes just staring at that door. Waiting for the handle to turn. Waiting for whatever was out there to force its way in. But nothing happened. Eventually I worked up the courage to get out of bed. I crept toward the door as quietly as I could, put my ear against it and listened. There was nothing. No sound of breathing. No footsteps. Nothing. I unlocked the door slowly, turned the handle, pulled it open just a crack. The hallway was dark and empty. I turned on the hallway light and checked the entire apartment. Every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. There was no one there. The front door was still locked from the inside. All the windows were closed and locked. I was completely alone. But I had heard that voice. I know I heard it. And the worst part was that it had sounded like me. Like something had been studying me, learning me, copying me. I packed a bag that night and left. I packed a bag that night and left. Didn't even wait until morning. Just threw some clothes and toiletries in a duffel bag and drove to Marcus's place. I ended up staying there for 2 weeks. During that time, I tried to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to break my lease and never go back to that apartment. But I'd paid first and last month's rent plus a deposit. I couldn't afford to just walk away from that money. I also started doing research, trying to find out if anything bad had happened in that building. Deaths, crimes, anything that might explain what I'd experienced. But I couldn't find anything. No news articles. No police reports. Nothing. The building was just an old apartment building. Boring. Ordinary. Nothing special. Finally, I called Mr. Chun. Told him I'd been having some issues at the apartment. Strange sounds. Asked him if any previous tenants had complained about similar things. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said no. Said he didn't know what I was talking about. But something in his voice told me he was lying. He knew exactly what I was talking about. I asked him if anyone had died in my unit. He got defensive. Said that was none of my business and that there was nothing wrong with the apartment. Said if I didn't want to live there anymore, he'd keep my deposit and I could break the lease. But I'd lose all that money. I went back to the apartment after those 2 weeks. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I felt stupid for running away. Maybe I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I just didn't want to lose the money. Whatever the reason, I moved back in. And for a while things were quiet. No humming. No breathing. No footsteps. No voice. I started to relax again. Started to think maybe it had all been some weird temporary thing. Like whatever had been there was gone now. I was wrong again. About a month later it came back. But this time it was different. More aggressive. More frequent. The humming happened every single night. The breathing came from different parts of the apartment. Sometimes the bedroom. Sometimes the bathroom. Once I even heard it coming from inside my closet. The footsteps became heavier. More deliberate. Like whatever was making them wanted me to know it was there. And the voice came back too. Always around 3:30 in the morning. Always outside my bedroom door. Always using that wrong version of my own voice to call my name and tell me to come out. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. Started sleeping on the couch in the living room with all the lights on. But it didn't matter. The voice would move. Would come to wherever I was. Would stand just out of sight and call to me. The final straw came in late January. I woke up one morning and found my bedroom door wide open. I know I had locked it before going to sleep because I checked it 3 times like I did every night. But there it was, standing open. And on the floor just inside the doorway was something that made my blood run cold. Muddy footprints. Small bare footprints tracking from the doorway to my bed and then back out again. Like something had come into my room while I slept. Had walked right up to where I was lying unconscious and vulnerable. Had stood there watching me. Then had walked back out. But here's the thing that really got me. The footprints were too small to be from an adult. They looked like they came from a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old. But the stride was wrong. The distance between the prints was too far apart. Like something child-sized had taken adult-sized steps. Or something had been imitating how a child walks but didn't quite get it right. I took pictures of the footprints with my phone, then got the hell out of there. I went straight to Mr. Chen's house and showed him the photos. Demanded to know what was in that apartment. Demanded to know what he wasn't telling me. He looked at the photos for a long time. Then he sat down heavily in his chair and sighed. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. Finally, he spoke. He told me that back in the 1970s a family had lived in that unit. A couple and their 7-year-old daughter. One night, the parents heard strange sounds in the apartment. Humming, breathing, footsteps. They thought it was their daughter playing games. But when they checked on her, she was sound asleep in her bed. The sounds continued for weeks. Always at night. Always when the family was trying to sleep. The parents started to think the building was haunted. But here's where it gets disturbing. One night, the mother woke up and saw her daughter standing in the hallway. Just standing there motionless in the dark. She called to her, but the girl didn't respond. Didn't even seem to hear her. The mother got up and walked toward her daughter. As she got closer, she realized something was wrong. The girl's eyes were open, but she wasn't blinking. And her mouth was moving like she was talking, but no sound was coming out. The mother reached out to touch her daughter, and the girl's head snapped toward her. That's when she saw that her daughter's expression was wrong. Her face looked like her daughter's face, but the expression on it was not something a child would make. It was ancient, knowing, malevolent. The girl smiled and spoke. But the voice that came out wasn't her daughter's voice. It was something else. Something trying to sound like her daughter but not quite getting it right. It said, "Mommy, come play with me." The mother screamed and grabbed her daughter. Shook her. The girl seemed to snap out of whatever trance she'd been in and started crying. She didn't remember standing in the hallway. Didn't remember anything. After that night, the parents decided to move out. They broke their lease and left within a week. But before they went, the mother did some research. Talked to neighbors. Talked to people who'd lived in the building for years. She learned that the building had been constructed on top of what used to be a cemetery. Back in the 1800s, it had been a pauper's cemetery where the city buried people who had no money and no family. Criminals. Vagrants. The forgotten. When the cemetery closed in the 1920s, most of the bodies were supposedly relocated. But there were rumors that not all of them had been moved. That some had been left behind when they built the apartment building. And there were stories. Stories going back decades of strange occurrences in that building. People hearing voices that sounded like their own. Seeing figures that looked like themselves. Waking up to find they'd been walking around the apartment with no memory of it. Sleepwalking, but not really sleepwalking. Like something else had been controlling them. Mr. Chun said he bought the building in the 1990s. He'd heard the stories but didn't believe them. Thought they were just urban legends. But then he started having problems keeping tenants in certain units. My unit specifically. People would move in and move out within weeks or months. Always with the same complaints. Strange sounds. Voices. Feeling like something was watching them. Trying to lure them. He said he didn't know what it was. Some kind of spirit or entity. Something that had been disturbed when they built the building. Something that was angry about being forgotten. And for some reason it liked to mimic people. To copy their voices and their appearance. Like it was trying to learn how to be human. I asked him why he didn't just tell people about this before they moved in. He looked down at his hands and said no one would rent the place if they knew. Said he needed the income. That he was sorry. I moved out the next day. Didn't even go back for my stuff. Just sent some friends to pack up my things while I waited in the car outside. I lost my deposit and last month's rent, but I didn't care. I needed to get away from that place. That was 3 years ago. I live in a different city now. A modern apartment building built on normal land with no history. But I still think about that voice sometimes. That wrong version of my own voice calling to me from the other side of my bedroom door. And sometimes late at night, when I'm alone, I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that door. If I'd gone out to play like it wanted. Would I still be me? Or would something else be living my life wearing my face? I don't know the answer to that. And I'm glad I never found out. But if you ever move into an old building and the rent seems too good to be true, maybe ask some questions first. Find out what used to be there before the building was built. Find out if other tenants have left quickly without explanation. And if you start hearing strange sounds at night, sounds that seem to come from inside your apartment, sounds that seem to be learning your voice, copying your speech patterns, trying to sound like you, then get out. Don't wait. Don't try to rationalize it. Just leave. Because whatever it is, it's not trying to scare you. It's trying to lure you. And I think if you let it, if you go to it, if you open that door and step out into the darkness, it won't let you come back. Not as yourself anyway. I still have nightmares about that apartment. About that voice. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and for a split second I think I hear it again. My own voice coming from somewhere in the darkness calling my name. Telling me to come out. But then I turn on the lights and I'm alone in my new apartment. Safe. Far away from that building and whatever lives inside it. At least I hope I am. Because the worst part isn't what happened to me in that apartment. The worst part is what Mr. Chun told me right before I left his house that day. He said that the entity, whatever it is, doesn't always stay in the building. Sometimes people who've lived there report that it follows them. Not right away. Sometimes months or even years later. They'll be in their new home thinking they're safe, and then they'll hear it. That familiar voice calling to them from the darkness. I asked him if that had happened to anyone. He said he didn't know. Said most people who moved out never contacted him again. They just disappeared into their new lives trying to forget. I think about that sometimes. Wonder if one night I'll wake up and hear that voice again. Wonder if it's been following me all this time, just waiting. Learning. Growing stronger. So far it hasn't happened. So far I've been safe. But every night before I go to bed I check all my doors and windows. Make sure they're locked. And I keep my phone right next to my pillow with the flashlight ready. Just in case. Because if I've learned anything from this experience, it's that there are things in this world that we don't understand. Things that exist in the spaces between waking and sleeping. Things that hunger for what we have. Our voices, our faces, our humanity. And sometimes they get close enough to touch us. I was lucky. I got away. But I don't know if my luck will last forever. And late at night, when the world is quiet and dark, I sometimes wonder if that voice is out there somewhere calling my name. Waiting for me to finally answer. Waiting for me to come out and play. Story number 3, I need to tell you about something that happened to me and my friends back in October of 2019. Something that still keeps me up at night. Something that made me promise myself I would never go camping in those woods again. And honestly, after what we experienced, I don't think any of us will ever look at the wilderness the same way. My name is Jake, and I'm 28 years old now, but I was 25 when this happened. Me and 3 of my closest friends from college decided to do one last camping trip before the weather got too cold. We were all living in different cities by then, and we barely saw each other anymore, so this trip felt important. Like maybe it was our last chance to do something together before life pulled us in different directions for good. There was me, and then there was Marcus, who had been my roommate for 3 years. He was the outdoorsy one. The guy who actually knew how to set up a tent without looking at the instructions. Then there was Devin, who was the jokester of the group, always making light of situations, always the one cracking jokes when things got tense. And finally there was Chris, who was the quiet one, the thinker, the guy who would notice things the rest of us missed. We decided on this spot Marcus had heard about from a coworker. Some remote area up in the Cascade Mountains in Washington state, about 4 hours from Seattle. His coworker had told him about this gorgeous clearing near a lake that was supposedly perfect for camping. Off the beaten path. No crowds. No noise. Just pure nature. That should have been our first warning sign right there. When someone tells you about a beautiful isolated spot that nobody knows about, there's usually a reason nobody goes there. We left on a Friday afternoon in mid-October. The weather had been getting colder, but that particular week had been unseasonably warm. Almost like summer was giving us one last gift before winter set in. The drive up was great. We had music playing. We were laughing and reminiscing about old times. Talking about girls we dated in college and stupid things we did at parties. Felt good to be together again. The sun was starting to get low in the sky when we finally turned off the main highway onto this narrow forest road. Marcus was driving his old Jeep and the road was rough, full of potholes and loose gravel. Tree branches scraped against the sides of the vehicle as we went deeper and deeper into the woods. I remember Devin made a joke about this being the beginning of every horror movie ever made. We all laughed, but there was something about the way he said it that made the joke fall a little flat. Like maybe we were all thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to admit it. The road kept getting narrower and the trees kept getting thicker until finally Marcus pulled into this small clearing and said this was it. This was where his coworker had told him to park. From here we would hike about 2 miles to reach the actual campsite. We all got out and started unloading our gear. The air was crisp and clean. You could smell pine and damp earth. The sky was turning that deep orange color that happens right before sunset. It was beautiful, but there was something else too. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. A stillness that felt heavier than it should have. Chris mentioned it first. He said, "Doesn't it seem too quiet?" And we all stopped for a second to listen. He was right. There were no birds, no insects, no rustling in the bushes, just silence. Complete and total silence. Marcus brushed it off. He said it was probably just because we were making so much noise unloading the Jeep and that the animals would come back once we moved on. That made sense, so we shrugged it off and started hiking. The trail was barely a trail at all. More like a suggestion of where previous hikers had walked. We had to push through branches and step over fallen logs. The sun was sinking fast and we knew we needed to reach the campsite before it got dark. None of us wanted to be setting up tents in complete darkness. About 40 minutes into the hike, Devin stopped and pointed at something off to the side of the trail. It was a tree. A big old pine tree, but there was something carved into it. We walked closer to get a better look. Someone had carved symbols into the bark. Not words. Not initials or hearts or any of the normal things you see carved into trees. These were symbols. Strange geometric shapes and patterns that looked old. Really old. The bark had grown around them in places, which meant they had been there for years. Maybe decades. Marcus said it was probably just some Native American markings or something from old settlers. Devin made another joke about Blair Witch Project and we all forced out some laughs, but I noticed Chris was really studying those symbols. He took a picture with his phone and I remember thinking that was smart because I wanted to look them up later too. We kept hiking and the sun kept sinking. The woods were getting darker. That thick kind of darkness where the trees block out what little light is left in the sky. We pulled out our flashlights and kept going. Finally, we reached the clearing that Marcus's coworker had told him about, and I have to admit it was stunning. There was a small lake. More like a large pond, really. The water was perfectly still and reflected what was left of the sunset. There was a flat grassy area perfect for tents. And surrounding it all were these massive old-growth trees that must have been hundreds of years old. But that silence was still there. No frogs croaking by the water. No fish jumping. No bugs buzzing around. Nothing. We set up camp quickly. We were all experienced enough that we could do it pretty fast even in the dark. Marcus and Devin shared a tent. Chris had his own small one-person tent. And I had brought my own two-person tent that I used solo because I liked the extra space. Once the tents were up, we built a fire. Getting it started took longer than it should have. The wood was damp even though it hadn't rained in days. The kindling kept smoking but wouldn't catch flame. But eventually we got it going and we sat around it cooking hot dogs and beans and drinking the beers we had packed in. The fire helped, pushed back the darkness and made things feel more normal. We talked and laughed and for a while everything seemed fine. Great even. This was exactly what we had wanted. Friends. Nature. Freedom. It was probably around 10 o'clock when things started to feel wrong again. The fire had died down to coals and we were thinking about heading to bed when Devin said he heard something. We all went quiet and listened. At first I didn't hear anything, but then I did. It was faint. So faint I almost thought I was imagining it. It sounded like humming. Not a tune really. Just a single low note that seemed to be coming from deep in the woods. It would hold for a few seconds, then stop, then start again. Marcus said it was probably just wind through the trees. Devin said wind doesn't sound like that. Chris didn't say anything. He just stared out into the darkness beyond our firelight. The humming stopped and we sat there in tense silence for maybe 5 minutes. Just when I thought we had all imagined it, we heard something else. Footsteps. Not animal footsteps. Human footsteps. Slow and deliberate. Walking through the leaves and branches somewhere in the woods around us. Marcus called out. He said, "Hello, is someone there?" His voice sounded too loud in the silence. Too aggressive. The footsteps stopped. We waited, but there was no response. No voice calling back. No explanation. Just more silence. Devin tried to laugh it off. He said it was probably just a park ranger checking on campers or maybe another camping group. But I could tell he was scared. We were all scared. There was something about those footsteps that felt wrong. They had been circling us. Not approaching the campsite directly but moving around the perimeter. Like something was studying us. Chris finally spoke up. He said we should keep the fire going all night and we should probably take shifts staying awake. Just to be safe. Nobody argued with him. We threw more wood on the fire and decided Marcus would take first watch until midnight. Then Devin until 2. Then me until 4. And Chris would take the last shift until sunrise. I went to my tent, but I didn't sleep. I just lay there in my sleeping bag listening to the night. I could hear Marcus moving around outside keeping the fire going. I could hear the fire crackling. And underneath it all I could hear that silence. That unnatural absence of sound that woods should never have. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke up to Devin shaking my tent. He said it was my turn for watch. I checked my phone. 2 a.m. I crawled out of my tent and Devin looked exhausted. He said nothing happened on his shift, but he was glad to be done with it. He practically ran to his tent. I sat by the fire and fed it more wood. The flames cast these long shadows that danced between the trees. Every shadow looked like a person. Every small sound made my heart race. I kept my flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other, even though there was no service out here. Around 3 a.m. I heard it again. That humming. But this time it was closer. Much closer. And it wasn't coming from one direction. It was coming from multiple directions. Like there were multiple people standing in the woods around our camp, all humming that same low note. I stood up and grabbed a stick from the fire. Something to defend myself with if I needed to. I called out and asked who was there. The humming stopped immediately. Then I heard the footsteps again. But this time they were all around us. Multiple sets of footsteps, all moving in the same slow, deliberate way. All circling our camp. I ran to Marcus and Devin's tent and unzipped it fast. I told them to wake up. Something was out there. Marcus came stumbling out half asleep, but he woke up fast when he heard what I was hearing. Devin came out too, and Chris emerged from his tent without me even calling him. We all stood there by the fire holding whatever we could find as weapons. Sticks. A camp shovel. Marcus had his hunting knife. And we listened to those footsteps circle us. Round and round. Never getting closer but never leaving either. Then the humming started again. All around us. That same low note. And I swear I could hear words underneath it. Not English. Not any language I recognized. But definitely words. Like a chant. Chris grabbed my arm. He said we needed to leave. Right now. We needed to pack up and hike back to the Jeep. I agreed. Marcus and Devin agreed. We weren't thinking about how stupid it would be to hike through dark woods while something was out there. We just knew we couldn't stay here. We started taking down tents as fast as we could. We didn't fold them properly. We just pulled up stakes and shoved fabric into bags. We dumped water on the fire. We grabbed our packs. The whole time those footsteps kept circling. That humming kept going. Just as we were about to leave the clearing, I made the mistake of shining my flashlight into the woods. And I saw them. Just for a second. Just a glimpse. But I saw them. They were people. Or they looked like people. But something was wrong with them. They were too tall. Too thin. Their movements were jerky and unnatural. And their eyes reflected the light from my flashlight like animal eyes do. I didn't tell the others what I saw. I just said we needed to go now. We started hiking back the way we came. Fast. Almost running. We didn't care about staying on the trail. We just moved. Marcus was in front with his flashlight. I was in back. Chris and Devin were in the middle. The footsteps followed us. We could hear them keeping pace. Sometimes close. Sometimes far. But always there. And the humming. That horrible humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. We hiked for what felt like hours. We should have reached the Jeep in 45 minutes, but we just kept going and going. The woods all looked the same in the dark. We were lost. Or the trail had changed. Or something was wrong with the woods themselves. Devin started to panic. He said we were going in circles. He said something was keeping us here. Marcus told him to shut up and keep moving. But I could tell Marcus was scared too. We were all terrified. Then Chris stopped walking. He just froze in place and pointed ahead. We all looked and saw lights. Multiple lights moving between the trees ahead of us. They looked like lanterns. Old-fashioned lanterns swaying as they moved. But there was nobody holding them. They just floated there about 6 feet off the ground. Moving slowly. Deliberately. And they were moving toward us. We turned and ran in a different direction. Branches whipped our faces. We tripped over roots and logs. Devin fell hard and we had to pull him up. He had twisted his ankle, but he kept moving. We all kept moving. I don't know how long we ran. Time stopped meaning anything. It was just running and fear and those sounds behind us. Those footsteps. That humming. And now those lights following us through the trees. Finally we burst through some bushes and there it was. The Jeep. We had somehow made it back. We threw our gear in without even looking and piled in. Marcus jammed the key in the ignition and turned it. The engine tried to turn over but didn't catch. He tried again. Nothing. He tried a third time and finally it roared to life. We didn't wait. We didn't look back. Marcus just threw it in reverse and punched the gas. We flew backward down that narrow forest road faster than was safe. Branches scraped metal. The suspension bounced over potholes. But we didn't slow down until we hit the main highway. Only then did we stop. Only then did we look at each other. We were scratched and bloody from branches. Devin was crying. Chris was pale as a ghost. Marcus's hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold the steering wheel. And I couldn't stop looking back, expecting to see something following us. We drove straight home. We didn't stop except for gas. Nobody talked much. What was there to say? We had all experienced the same thing. We had all seen those lights, heard those sounds, felt that wrongness. When we got back to Seattle, it was Sunday morning. We said quick goodbyes and went to our separate homes. I don't think any of us wanted to talk about what happened. I know I didn't. I just wanted to shower and sleep and forget. But I couldn't forget. None of us could. A few days later, Chris called me. He said he had looked up those symbols we saw carved in the tree. He had run the photo through some online databases and done a bunch of research. He said they were old, really old, and they were warnings, boundary markers used by indigenous people to mark places that should never be entered, places where something wrong lived. I asked him what kind of something. He said the legends weren't specific, just that there were places in deep woods where things existed that weren't quite human anymore. Things that used to be human maybe, or things that pretended to be human. Things that would circle travelers at night, hum old songs, led people in circles until they died of exhaustion or fear or something worse. He said we were lucky we made it out. Most people who ignored those warnings never did. I haven't talked to Marcus or Devin much since then. We text occasionally, but none of us have suggested another camping trip. I think we all know that we experienced something out there that can't be explained. Something that shouldn't exist but does. Sometimes late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear it again. That humming, just at the edge of my hearing, just for a second. And I wonder if we really did escape. Or if we brought something back with us. Some small piece of that wrongness that still follows us even now. I drive past the turnoff for that forest road sometimes. I live in Seattle and it's on the route to visit my parents. And every time I pass it, I feel this pull. This urge to turn down that road. To go back to that clearing. To see if it was all real or if we imagined it. But I never do. I never will. Because I know it was real. I know something is out there in those woods. Something that has been there for a very long time. Something that will be there long after we're all gone. We should not have camped there. We should have listened to that silence. To that absence of life. To every instinct that told us something was wrong. But we didn't. And now we live with what we experienced. With the knowledge that there are places in this world where humans aren't welcome, where we never should have been. If you ever find yourself in the woods and everything is too quiet, if you see strange symbols carved into trees, if you hear humming in the darkness, if you see lights moving where no lights should be, please, turn around, go home. Don't make the same mistake we did, because some places aren't meant for us. Some places belong to things we can't understand. And those things don't take kindly to visitors. I've told you my story because I need someone else to know. I need someone else to understand what happened. And maybe I need to warn people, to keep others from making the same mistake. We survived that night, but I'm not sure we ever really left those woods. Part of me is still there, still sitting by that fire. Still hearing those footsteps circle in the darkness. Still watching those lights move between the trees. And I think it always will be. If this story gave you chills or made you think twice about your next camping trip, then please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want to hear more stories like this. Subscribe if you haven't already because I share true horror stories and unexplained encounters every week. And most importantly, turn on that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever experienced something in the woods that you couldn't explain? Have you ever been somewhere that just felt wrong? I read every single comment and I love hearing your stories too. Share this video with someone who loves horror or someone who needs to be reminded that not all camping trips end well. Thank you so much for watching and listening to my story. Stay safe out there, everyone. And remember, if the woods go silent, maybe it's time to leave. I'll see you in the next one.